The Kiwi presenters that you've shoulder tapped, and sort of what was the process for that?
Look, there'll be more announcements on that in due course, but I can say with confidence you should look forward to seeing Susie Cato on TV a bit more frequently again in the future. A well-known household name for New Zealanders, but there'll be some other announcements on that shortly. We should be in a position to start releasing programming details fairly soon. This would be the type of material that you'd be getting if you were at the senior level of a primary, a senior level primary school student. Your parents will get a nice little fold out here that tells them the sorts of things that they should be doing with you, how to use the resources that they are getting. There are some workbooks that have been supplied by Te Kura, the correspondence school, and this one here, you've got a workbook on signs and symbols, for example, that people can work their way through. There is a copy of the school journal. This one is a 2014 school journal, but has a particular focus on Anzac Day and on the Anzacs. Obviously, it's topical, timely content. Then you might get other workbooks. So this one's called a Picture This workbook, which includes a number of activities that people can do both in the home and outside of the home, i.e. in their backyards. There might also be other resources. In this case, there's a workbook on volcanoes. So that's the sort of material that you might get if you were getting one of the packs for senior primary school. I have a pack for the junior primary years. All of them, by the way, have messages that you'll be very familiar with around health and safety and around COVID. But again, materials for parents to help them guide them through. This one has a particular focus. There's some workbooks here on numbers and talking through a variety of different number activities. There's an activity pack of fold-out cards that can be used. The Ready to Read series, very familiar to many. This one is Margaret Mahi storybook. So that material is supplied. There's a fairly extensive workbook that's supplied for those students. And then the final one that I will just talk you through, the nice big box. This is the sort of thing that you would get if you were in an early learning setting, an early childhood education. There is a pack of materials for your parents, which includes a whole lot of activities. In this case, there is a jigsaw puzzle, a hard jigsaw puzzle, a variety of well-known stories that will be familiar to many New Zealand families, including one of my favourites, the Little Yellow Digger. You'll find in there. There are some pavement chalks for activities, some felt tip pens, some crayons, a glue stick, some fabric, which goes with the activities, some coloured cardboard and regular drawing paper. So those are the sorts of activities you might get. I have one for the older age group in the early learning bracket. There is another pack which is for the younger age bracket in early learning as well. So those are the ones that I've seen so far. I haven't seen any of the secondary school ones, but they started work on putting these together just before the lockdown started. As you can imagine, they're putting together up to 500,000 of these packs. So they've been working at pace in order to be able to get them together.
You'll have noted today that we've issued a clear warning to those intending to travel out of town for Easter that they should change their plans immediately. Police will have an increased presence in the community. People can expect to see more checkpoints and more mobile patrols. Districts will have some flexibility as to how to best manage this, but I know that in some areas, checkpoints will be the most logical way of checking legitimate travel. We've recorded a total of 367 breaches of the Civil Defence Emergency Management or Health Act notices, up 76 on yesterday. There are 45 prosecutions, 309 warnings and 13 youth referrals. We're continuing to receive a huge number of reports of potential breaches, which tells us that members of the public clearly want others to comply, a positive signal. To date, we've received 37,000 reports of breaches. Just under 7,000 of those were about businesses or organisations. In relation to self-isolation checking for those who have come across the border, since the 3rd of April, Police has conducted just almost 1,200 face-to-face checks on all arrivals into New Zealand. 575 of those were conducted yesterday alone. I'm confident that by the end of the week, we will have 100% of those arriving in the country being visited by police as part of a compliance check. For the moment, we're continuing to use the text service to help us with our understanding of where people are, and if they don't engage, who we need to add to our lists for visits. In terms of crime, based on the trends to date, we're not forecasting any significant increase in crime over the coming period. We have been seeing an increase in family harm-related calls for service, and we're working closely with our partners to ensure those people can be looked after. We take family harm calls very seriously, and we will attend. We urge people to call us on 111 if they're concerned for themselves, others, their neighbours. Our initial data, and based on what we know happened overseas, suggests we can expect an increase in calls about mental health as people struggle with the impact of isolation and the general stress of this situation. Similarly to mental health calls, international research suggested there may be an increase in self-harm situations. However, thankfully, we have not seen this yet. In relation to police staff safety, the total number of staff who have tested positive for COVID-19 remains at just 2. They continue to be supported and managed appropriately. We have currently some 600 staff in self-isolation, half of those being constabulary members. The behaviour of a small minority of people in targeting police staff or members of the public by coughing or spitting is extremely disappointing and concerning. We have identified spitting as an escalating risk to both police officers and the community. There have been multiple reports of hospital staff and supermarket workers being spat on or being threatened in the same manner. Since the introduction of the Level 4 restrictions, 8 of our people have had to self-isolate after being spat at by people who either said they had tested positive for COVID-19 or who had symptoms of being unwell. If someone does spit or cough on another person and infect them, they risk being charged with infecting with disease under the Crimes Act and face a penalty of up to 14 years imprisonment should they be found guilty. While we have a range of measures in place to protect our people, given the frontline nature of police work, there are risks. This completely unacceptable behaviour of spitting puts our people and others at risk. It causes stress and anxiety as affected staff are then required to self-isolate until we can confirm whether or not COVID-19 may be present. I'm incredibly proud of our staff, like the many of hundreds of other emergency workers and essential workers who commit themselves to the work they are doing for the sake of a safe and well community.
Today marks almost 2 weeks since we entered Alert Level 4. For many of you, this will have been the longest 14 days of your life, and I genuinely want to thank you all for uniting against COVID-19. For those of you who plan to go away over Easter, it's tough having to be stuck at home instead. Easter is usually a time for relaxation, celebration, time with loved ones, but you can still do that. Just stay home, hang out with friends and family online or by phone, or even have a Zoom party. You'll also need to worship at Easter from home. Hopefully your church is conducting services online or via other broadcast technology. And please continue to reach out to those who you know may be vulnerable or at risk or need help. A friendly phone call could really make someone's Easter. I've got a few updates on some measures that I've talked about before that I thought would be useful to talk through. I mentioned last week the phone outreach program that's being led by the Ministry of Social Development and the National Emergency Management Agency to support people over 70. This is for those who are living alone and for whom we have no email address. They're potentially people who may not be receiving information on where to access help. So far, more than 11,000 calls have been made, and we're asking people how they're faring in self-isolation, On a scale of 0 for not coping well to 3, which is coping very well, the average score is 2.8. It's really heartening to know that most of our over 70s are managing in self-isolation, and if they do need help, they're getting the support that they require. But if you know older New Zealanders in your neighbourhood, I'd still really encourage you to give them a call or have a chat over the fence and just see how they're doing. The government has put in place a broad range of extra measures to support communities to offset the impact of Covid-19. Your first point of call for finding out what you need should be the All of Government helpline, which is 0800 779 997. This call centre will be able to assist with the right information on which agency can best help, and there's also a wealth of information on the Covid-19 website, which is covid19.govt.nz. If you need help accessing essential goods, financial assistance, it's important that you ask, and ask early for help, especially for things like food, medicines or transport to get these essentials. If you're in this situation and it is urgent, help is available from your local Civil Defence Emergency Management Group. All 16 CDEM groups around the country have dedicated helplines you can call, and they're on the covid19.govt.nz website on the Life at Home page. So again, you can call that All of Government helpline directly, or you can reach out in your local region. Please do ask for help if you need it. It's there to support you. Civil Defence Emergency Management Groups are also supporting in the distribution of food parcels to households that are unable to afford or access these. As of Monday, they have distributed 7,727 food parcels and 528 food vouchers across New Zealand. They're now providing reimbursements directly to food banks, and most calls to CDEM group numbers are in relation to support for food. So again, I encourage you to reach out if you're in that situation. These mechanisms are there to support you. Finally, yesterday the Minister of Civil Defence extended the state of national emergency for a further 7 days. Under the Civil Defence Emergency Management Act, a state of national emergency expires 7 days after it is declared, unless extended or terminated earlier. The Minister has extended the state of national emergency to ensure we continue to have all the resources, support and powers that we need to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in our communities and support the Alert Level 4 measures. This is the second time it has been extended. And I just want to reiterate, the extension of the state of national emergency does not mean we're in a Alert Level 4 for an extra 7 days. It's within the Alert Level 4 timeframe.
So today there are 50 new cases to report of COVID-19, made up of 26 new confirmed cases and 24 new probable cases. There are no additional deaths to report. So there are now 282 reported cases of people who have recovered from COVID-19 infection, an increase of 41 on yesterday. The new total of confirmed and probable cases is 1,210. Today there are 12 people in hospital with COVID-19 infection, including 4 in intensive care, 1 in Wellington, 1 in Waitemata, 1 in Counties Manukau and 1 in Southern. 2 of those people are in a critical condition. For the cases we have information on, we are seeing a strong link to overseas travel, though that continues to decline as a proportion. It is 41%, as well as links to confirmed cases in New Zealand at 43% and community transmission at 2%. We are still investigating 14% of the cases. There are still 12 significant clusters, and the numbers for our 3 largest clusters are at the Marist College in Auckland, 84. The Matamata cluster has also 84 and Bluff 81 cases. In terms of testing, yesterday there were 4,098 tests processed, bringing the total number of tests carried out to date to 46,875. That yesterday was our highest number of daily tests, and the 7-day rolling average is now 3,343. Our testing capacity continues to increase despite that increase in the number of daily tests, and we now have stock for just under 50,000 tests, and that continues to grow. I know there is interest in healthcare workers who have been infected with COVID-19, some of whom have travelled back from overseas and or have acquired it locally, either in the community through being contacts of existing cases or indeed potentially in the workplaces. We do have a breakdown of those workers, and the biggest categories are there are around 20 support and care workers working in both hospital and or care in the community settings, 17 nurses, 7 are in administrative related roles, there are 7 doctors and 3 medical students. We do know, as I said, that around a quarter of those health workers affected have actually travelled back from overseas, so they've acquired their infection offshore, and we are working on a breakdown to determine of those who have acquired the infection onshore here, what proportion was inside the workplace and what was outside the workplace. We've also been able to collate all the data on laboratory testing and break that down by District Health Board and look at the ethnicity breakdown, and we'll be providing that information on our website. We are still waiting to complete the data set to include the Waikato lab data. And so far, though, if we look at the 35,000 people for whom we do have testing, if I look at the ethnicity breakdown, 13.6% are Māori, 7.8% Pacifica, Asian is 12%, European and other 64.2%, and Middle Eastern and Latin American 2%. We will provide those data on our website and update them regularly. Final comments, flu vaccination. I just want to encourage people who are in that category who receive publicly funded vaccination, pregnant women, people with pre-existing conditions, and those over 70. It is essential travel to go and get your flu vaccination, and practices have got ways to vaccinate you, including coming out and doing it in the car if in some cases. Please do. That is essential travel, and it's very important to get those vaccinations now. And that goes for other care you might require at your general practitioners. Do not hesitate going and receiving either care for an acute condition or your usual care for chronic conditions you may have. That is also regarded as essential travel, and you will not get in trouble with the police for doing so. We do have plenty of flu vaccine supply that has been distributed in a managed way from the centre. I will now hand back to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Director General. As Dr Bloomfield has highlighted, today we have the highest number of tests reported in any one day and the lowest number of new cases in 2 weeks. We may yet see bumps along the way, but as I said yesterday, I remain cautiously optimistic that we are starting to turn a corner. It's all the more reason to stay the course of our self-isolation as a nation. As I said yesterday, we have also surpassed 1 million New Zealanders being supported by our wage subsidy scheme. One of the key principles of the wage subsidy scheme is that we keep people connected to work. There's another sector that's doing this alongside us, and that is our primary sector. You will have seen earlier today that the Minister of Agriculture highlighted one of our star export performers, horticulture, that is keeping New Zealanders both fed and in jobs at this really important time. Overseas workers traditionally fill many roles in our fruit and veggie growing sector, but as you can imagine, the action that we've taken as a government at the border has meant fewer overseas workers have been available. And now, amid our kiwi fruit harvest, we're seeing reports that those workforces now have over 90% New Zealand staff compared to 50% last season. Last week alone, more than 100 staff were placed into roles in the Bay of Plenty, Auckland and Nelson. The pip fruit industry, made up of apples and pears, has seen around 200 workers from other industries placed into jobs across the country. So today I want to give my thanks to our food producers in every part of that workforce for continuing to look after us and for the actions in that industry to make sure that people remain in employment. Now, I know there are some workers on our orchards at the moment from the Pacific, working hard here while Cyclone Harold crosses their homelands, particularly Vanuatu and Fiji. And I can understand the worry that you will have for your families. A quick update on that front. This morning, a P3 Defence Force aircraft left New Zealand to provide much needed surveillance of damage. I expect that will actually be happening as we speak. We also have the C-130 at the ready to deploy with essential supplies. In the meantime, our thoughts are with particularly the nation of Vanuatu as they come to grips with the impact of that cyclone and understand that we, of course, are still building a picture of just the scale of that cyclone as we speak. Today, I also have an update on how our aviation relief package is supporting our industries as well and keeping our isolated communities connected. You'll recall that we set aside $600 million in our COVID relief package to support this key part of our transport infrastructure. As you can imagine, air freight connectivity is really critical for our remote communities. They also help ensure we receive urgent supply of medicines, PPE and critical equipment. We now have 8 initial support agreements with airlines and a ground handling company around the country, totalling up to $4.7 million. And of course, we need to make sure our regions are easily able to access critical time-sensitive freight, food, medical supplies, blood donations. So the Chatham Islands now have their Airlink secured, and Air Chathams is making 3 trips a week, making sure residents get what they need. This package is also providing support to the likes of Air Napier and Barrier Air. In addition, most of our high-value goods were carried overseas in passenger aircraft, and of course many of those are no longer flying, and so we've stepped in. Supported by our relief package, Air New Zealand has now made 17 flights since Monday last week to Shanghai, Hong Kong, Los Angeles, San Francisco and Sydney. At least 18 more flights are planned over the next 10 days. They are taking food overseas and returning with cargo, which includes PPE, hand sanitizer, thermal imaging equipment, test kits and flu vaccinations. We know we need to do more though. This is not just a short-term challenge, so we've committed $330 million to supporting international air freight over the next 6 months. We've received 16 proposals from airlines and carriers all over the world to help critical air freight continue, and we're evaluating those proposals as we speak, and we'll have further announcements later this month.
Crunching data from overseas, researchers from the Doherty Institute found that if Australia did nothing, up to 89% of the population could have been infected and only 15% of people needing intensive care would have got a bed. Using quarantine and isolation, but no social distancing, only 30% would be able to get an ICU bed. At the moment, there are 93 coronavirus patients in ICUs around the country and nearly 6,000 people have been infected. Laura Tingle, 730's chief political correspondent. Laura, the public health situation at the moment compares pretty favourably to countries around the world.
It does, and the point that the Chief Medical Officer made today, Lee, was that our figures compared to those sort of internationally based modelling numbers are actually better than the best case scenario that the government was expecting just a few weeks ago. So they're actually very optimistic on that basis about how things are looking. And in fact, they're so good that our numbers of patients are so small that it's actually going to delay the release of or the collection of any Australian modelling for some time, certainly weeks.
If the death toll and the number of cases stays comparatively low, is it possible that the public, and in particular younger people, might start to ask, is it really necessary to have the economy on this level of shutdown?
Well, I think we're already seeing pressure from some sectors for the lockdown to be lifted, and certainly that's a real concern for the government, that people will stop taking this seriously, which is why you saw the PM and the Chief Medical Officer talking about the fact that there are these 500 unknown people out there who are spreading the disease, probably completely unknowingly. But it really brings back to the point that this is a dual crisis. It's not just a health crisis, it's an economic crisis, and Parliament's meeting tomorrow to pass this massive $130 billion JobKeeper subsidy, the biggest ever measure passed by a Parliament, and it reflects the fact that the government thinks that at least $6 million people will lose their jobs or have already lost their jobs as a result of the economic shock from this virus, and the economy is going to need all the help it can get, even if people do start going out and about and increasing the health risk.
Laura Tingle, thanks very much.
Thanks, Lee.
Professor Henry Ergas is a distinguished economist and a scholar. He writes for the Australian newspaper. Yesterday, in the light of what Graham has just said, he made some very important points that we should remember in quoting statistics about these cases. The age composition of the population is a very important factor. More than 80% of the fatalities around the world have occurred amongst people aged 70 and over. Those aged at least 80 account for half of all deaths, while comprising fewer than 15% of the cases. And the risk of death in those age groups and in others is materially increased by what they call comorbidities, that is, patients carrying other conditions, especially those associated with diseases of the respiratory system. Then, of course, fatalities are significantly higher, as Professor Ergas said, in countries where the very old make up a relatively large share of the population and they're already likely to be in poor health. 7% of Italy's population is aged 80 and older, compared with 3.9% of ours. Then there are other factors, as he said, which compound the differences between Australia and those countries Graham was talking about. Aged care homes, for example, where fatalities have been appallingly high in Italy, France and Spain, are relatively tightly regulated in Australia, notwithstanding the fact that we've had deaths here in aged care homes. Nonetheless, our health and safety levels are more than respectable by global standards. Then there's the question of vaccination rates against seasonal influenza, which are very high in this country, and that's important because, as Professor Ergas says, and I quote, it materially affects the respiratory health of vulnerable groups and highlights widespread voluntary compliance with health advice, unquote. Then he made the further point, Professor Ergas, that the average distance, and this is a key point, between homes in Australia is about twice that of the United States and nearly 4 times that of Europe. So with the social distancing restrictions that are now in place, our settlement patterns reduce social interaction and limit contagion. Now, no one is saying we can relax restrictions, but from the outset, we should have been targeting highly vulnerable groups, and we should have been tighter about our borders at the outset. But Professor Ergas made one further point, that in spite of all the alarmist talk, our hospital capacity has been expanded. And that capacity is being increased because there are restrictions in place which are curtailing the incidence of things that normally consume scarce hospital resources. That is, there are fewer drink drivers, therefore fewer accidents, fewer sporting injuries, fewer complications from elective surgery, which is now not taking place. And that led Professor Ergas to the conclusion, I quote, there is consequently little basis, at least in the data as it stands, for the incessant move to clamp downs that in some cases are absurdly draconian. He said, and I quote, as well as being unnecessary, heavy-handed measures may erode community support for the restrictions, undermining our high levels of voluntary compliance with Australians already making extraordinary sacrifices. This, he said, is a time for prudence, not panic. I think the views of Professor Ergas deserve respect, and of course, above all else, we do need an exit strategy.
Parliament sitting today, as you saw just before, to pass the government's JobKeeper package. The Prime Minister's told Australians to stay home over the Easter weekend, emphasising we're at a critical moment in the spread. Modelling released by the government shows Australia's in a positive position compared with other countries, but the fight against coronavirus is here to stay. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian says lockout measures could be eased if the state's curve continues to flatten, but she warned the move could see another spike in cases as well. And the first round of travellers quarantined in Sydney hotels have been released after 14 days in isolation. Let's check in on the state-by-state breakdown. There are almost 6,000 confirmed cases across the country. 2 more fatalities, one in Victoria and one in South Australia, have brought the national toll to 50. As you can see there, though, we have more than 2,500 recovered so far. New South Wales has reported another 48 cases, taking the state's total above 2,700. That's more than double Victoria's 1,212. Queensland has confirmed an additional 9 cases overnight, a total of 943. WA and South Australia each with more than 400 cases, while Tasmania's almost reached 100 infections. Taking a look at the territories, the ACT's confirmed 97 cases, while the Northern Territory has 28. Here's the coronavirus curve nationally. What you can see there is that physical distancing is making progress. Since the 4th of April, we haven't been over 200 cases reported each day. That's down from that peak on the 28th of March. And you can see steadily climbing that 4 days at 300, just 2 days in the 200s. Now, here's the situation around the world. There are more than 1.4 million cases. The death toll is above 80,000. New York State has suffered its deadliest day, recording 731 fatalities. US President Donald Trump has launched an attack on the World Health Organization, claiming it's China-centric. The International Labour Organization has projected the pandemic could wipe out 195 million jobs globally. Turkey has the world's most rapidly growing infection rate. The number is increasing by more than 3,000 cases a day. And the number of confirmed cases in Africa has risen above 10,000. Now let's take a look at the number of active cases around the world. You can see here that the USA is leading on that particular tally. Italy and Spain have both levelled off around the 94,000 and 83,000 mark. You can see there, ahead of France and Germany as well, still well ahead of the UK as well, which we know is in the grip of its own pandemic issues there. Here's the number of tests conducted per million people. Now, we use this metric because it's a good one for understanding each country's approach to the virus. We can see that Italy was forced to ramp up its testing when it really started to have those issues in the north of the country. They've overtaken us. We were the best testers in the world for a while. We've still leading, though, Germany and Spain. The USA is quite far behind, especially considering how pervasive the issue has become there, and ahead of the UK as well.
Good afternoon and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has entered his 3rd day in intensive care after being hospitalised for persistent COVID-19 symptoms. The UK Health Minister, Edward Arger, has said that the Prime Minister is stable and in good spirits. He has conceded that doctors had given the Prime Minister oxygen support, but had never put him onto a ventilator. On Wednesday morning, British newspapers led with stories wishing the Prime Minister a speedy recovery. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who is deputising for Boris Johnson, called him a fighter and said that he would be back at the helm pretty soon.
So all of our thoughts and prayers are with the Prime Minister at this time, with Carrie and with his whole family. And I'm confident he'll pull through. Because if there's one thing I know about this Prime Minister, he's a fighter. And he'll be back at the helm, leading us through this crisis in short order.
Secretary Raab attended the cabinet meetings in the Prime Minister's stead, but he is yet to assume full prime ministerial powers and is still working out of the Foreign Office. Major decisions have been left to the collective wisdom of the cabinet, and the government is yet to decide on extending the 3-week-long social distancing norms in the country. On Tuesday, 786 deaths were reported in the United Kingdom, bringing the total to around 6,200. More than 55,000 cases have been confirmed in the country so far. If this trend continues, chances are the social distancing norms will be extended. Now we are joined by Stuart Smith, live from London, for more insight on this. Good afternoon to you, Stuart. Second night in ICU for Boris Johnson. Now we are being told that his condition is stable and he is in good spirits. What are the latest details that you have for us?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. The government, 10 Downing Street, have said that he is fine, he is stable, and he is in good spirits. One newspaper today reported that his fever also seems to have come down, which is definitely a good sign. If we're looking for signs of optimism for Boris Johnson's condition, it is the case that those who are put straight onto a ventilator when they enter an intensive care unit do tend to suffer much more. So the fact that he's not yet been put onto a ventilator and has only just been given oxygen these past few days is a good sign.
Right, now this is of course a critical time for the country. Dominic Raab at the helm, and some big decisions need to be made. As an example, what to do regarding the current lockdown and social distancing situation. What is happening there?
Well, like you say, the way the British government works is that there is no designated second in command. So Dominic Raab was asked by Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, to keep going whilst he's incapacitated, but decisions will still be made by the Cabinet, as that is the only official decision-making body that can make these decisions. Dominic Raab and Matt Hancock have been in discussions about extending the lockdown in London. It's not as strong as in other countries, but at the weekend there were many thousands of people still heading to parks and potentially spreading the virus. So they will be reviewing the lockdown measures sometime later this week to see whether they should be extended further. But it'll be a decision by the Cabinet, not by Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, unilaterally.
Right, and looking at Europe, France has now recorded over 10,000 deaths. This is the fourth country in the world to do so. This is significant.
It is significant because especially there was talk earlier in the week that France may be heading towards its peak, but we just saw today the greatest number of deaths in a 24-hour period, 1,700, including hospitals and care homes. So the France's health minister has said that this is not the peak. We do need to keep going, and lockdown measures, indeed in Paris, have just been increased. You are now no longer allowed to exercise during the day between the hours of 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. So hope for France potentially that they are reaching the peak, but they're definitely not there yet, and they're definitely not relaxing any measures.
Thank you for that report. That's Stuart Smith joining us live from London for the latest on COVID-19 there.
Good evening once again. Day 1174 of this Trump administration. 210 days to go until our presidential election. And the president made clear today voting by mail, in his view, is dangerous, terrible, and corrupt. And he last voted by mail in 2018, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. We'll have more on that later. About today's White House briefing, the president said all of that stuff he was saying a few weeks back about coronavirus. The cases will go to zero. It will disappear. We're totally prepared. Democratic hoax, comparing it to the flu, saying in the warmth of April it will miraculously go away. All of that was because he regards himself as a cheerleader for our country. Today, about his team, he said, we've done a great job, not a good job, but a great job. He said today, maybe we are getting to the top of the curve. He also kind of claimed credit for curing a woman of the coronavirus. He said she's a Democrat, African-American with a beautiful manner of speaking. She appeared on Fox News last night to say she took the hydrochloroquine on the president's recommendation, and it was like a miracle. He didn't stop there on that front. He is selling hydrochloroquine hard. He said it again today. I say try it. You're not going to die from this pill. The side effects, he said, are from the antibiotic, the Zithromax Z-Pack. He repeated, I really think it's a great thing to try. Today, the president went after the World Health Organization. And to be clear, this is a Fox News hobby horse, even though on February 10th, he said they were doing a fantastic job. The thought here is to blame the WHO for downplaying the risk from China. It also lets the president continue to say, largely unchallenged, that he closed our borders to China, even though about 400,000 people continued to fly here, and that he closed our borders to Europe, which was never true. Back here in the real world, New York City reached peak hellscape today, averaging 1 death every 2 minutes, over 800 new deaths, over 5,800 new cases just today. Nationwide, the death toll is pushing 13,000. There are some encouraging signs. China has ended its lockdown of Wuhan, the city where the virus that has shaken the planet was first discovered. For the people there, it means daylight after 76 days inside, and the slow push to get life back to normal starting tomorrow, their time. The rest of the world is still grappling with the pandemic. More than 1.4 million people are infected across the globe. Tonight, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson remains in intensive care. His government says he has not been put on a ventilator. At the White House, the president seemed to be trying to prepare the country for increasingly difficult days to come.
This will be a very painful week, And next week, at least part of next week, there's a monster we're fighting. But signs are that our strategy is totally working. We're looking to have far fewer deaths than originally thought, and I think we're heading in that direction.
The president also said he was concerned about the number of African Americans who are now dying from COVID-19, saying he didn't like it. New York and New Jersey both reported their highest one-day toll in virus-related deaths today. But New York's governor also found reason for optimism.
Total number of newly hospitalized is up from yesterday. But when you look at the 3-day averaging of these numbers, the 3-day average is down, which is good news. We are reaching a plateau in the total number of hospitalizations, and you can see the growth, and you see it starting to flatten. Again, this is a projection. It still depends on what we do, and what we do will affect those numbers.
Across the river on the Jersey side, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy extended that state's public health emergency by 30 days, closing state parks, keeping schools shuttered in an effort to further social distancing, something he says seems to be working. Officials in two other hotspots, Louisiana and Detroit, say they're also beginning to see the impact of keeping people off the streets.
We're seeing early signs that the mitigation efforts are starting to pay off. We are seeing early signs that the curve is starting to flatten.
This is the first glimmer of light we have seen from the data since this pandemic started. The storm's not over, but for the first time, we can see we can beat this.
Even Disney is looking ahead, saying theme park visitors may encounter temperature checks on that day when the parks reopen. Meanwhile, there are more questions about what the president knew in the early days of this pandemic. Today, he was asked about the New York Times report. We talked about it on our broadcast last night on memos written by his then trade advisor, Peter Navarro, back in January, warning about, almost predicting, the potentially devastating impact of the coronavirus.
When did you see them, and how does these memos sort of square with what you've often said, that nobody could have predicted this? It sounds like he was predicting it.
I didn't see him, but I heard he wrote some memos talking about pandemic. I didn't see him. I didn't look for him either. I asked him about it just a little while ago because I read something about a memo. I said, "Did you do a memo?" I didn't see it. He said, "Yes, I talked about the possibility of a pandemic." Nobody said it's going to happen, but, there is a possibility. There always has been a possibility. And I obviously was concerned about it because I closed down our country to China, which was heavily infected. I then closed it down to Europe. But I'm not going to go out and start screaming, this could happen, this could happen. So, again, as president, I think a president has to be a cheerleader for their country.
All right, so let's start with the big story that is emerging from South Korea, where more than 50 patients who reportedly were deemed to have completely recovered from the COVID-19 infection have now tested positive once again. So let's try and explain as to how this may have happened. Now, over the course of the last few days, multiple patients were released from quarantine centers in the North Gyeongsang province. Now, 51 of them, however, have now tested positive yet again, and this is due to what is now being described as the reactivation of the virus within their bodies. A COVID-19 test reads the virus markers in a human body. Now, experts say that these markers can actually fluctuate over a period of time, and sometimes they are so low that the tests actually come back negative. And this is what seems to have happened with these 51 patients in South Korea. The scientists have assured the public that this is not a case of survivors having contracted the virus yet again from an external source. Now, this particular instance has also raised some important questions about how efficient the rapid testing kits are. Now, South Korea is also contemplating a controversial surveillance measure. The government is thinking of electronically tagging people once they are released from quarantine, and activists say that this would be a violation of an individual's privacy. Now, the plan is to connect electronic bracelets to mobile phones via Bluetooth The system will alert authorities when the distance between the bracelet and the mobile phone crosses a particular threshold. And now to give us more insights into what is happening in terms of these cases, we are joined in by our correspondent Bruce Harrison, who's now joining us live from Seoul in South Korea. Now, good afternoon to you, Bruce. This is rather an interesting, and some would in fact describe it as a bizarre case that has come to light, where 51 people who had been completely recovered of the COVID-19 infection have now tested positive yet again. What's happened in this case?
Right now, Mohammed, I think the government's trying to figure that out. Overall, I think they're more focusing on the fact that cases here continue to drop. Just Monday and Sunday, we saw 47 cases each day. This 50-odd cases that was confirmed on Tuesday and reported today, Wednesday, isn't a significant leap. Ultimately, they're trying to reinforce stricter quarantine measures and make sure that there's no new cases coming in from out of the country right now. Local transmissions still seem to be at a fairly significantly low level at this time.
Right, and at this point of time, what are the experts suggesting in terms of containing the spread of the COVID-19? If I'm audible to you, Bruce, if we could dwell a bit in terms of these 50-odd cases that have emerged in South Korea, what is the administration saying about them?
Mohammed, which cases in particular are you referring to? It's quite windy up here.
Right, the cases that I'm talking about are these 51 cases where people who had been discharged from a quarantine center and they have tested positive again for the COVID-19 infections.
Yes, and the government, like I said, is trying to understand the underlying causes of how this is possible at this time. I mean, there's still a lot we don't know about the novel coronavirus. There's no vaccine at this time. They're trying to figure out exactly what would have caused a scenario like this in these individuals coming from these quarantine centers.
All right, and also, what is the state of the restrictions in terms of the lockdown measures that were imposed? Is something like that being talked about right now in South Korea?
There's no lockdowns. There's no consideration for a lockdown right now because the overall case numbers have fallen, whether it's imported or locally transmitted right now. The government wants to avoid any kind of scenario like we saw in Wuhan or other cities around the world. The government has said time and time again they don't think that's an effective approach to fighting COVID-19, so they're avoiding that for the time being. Simply, they are just increasing quarantine restrictions. So I believe you mentioned that at the top of this bulletin that they were going to employ different tracking measures, whether it's a monitoring bracelet or continuing to rely on smartphones to make sure people stay within their quarantines. That's really about as strict as it's getting right now.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Bruce, for joining us from Seoul and getting us those insights in terms of what is happening in South Korea right now.
As the COVID-19 rages on across the world, the Chinese city of Wuhan, which was the epicenter of the viral outbreak, is emerging from strict quarantine. With the city no longer under lockdown to curb the spread of the virus, residents are regaining freedom of movement. The first train set off from Wuhan at 6:25 a.m., and it was one of over 270 passenger trains bound for destinations across China today. These include those to Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Chengdu. Authorities say disinfection work has been carried out in all stations and trains prior to service resumption. Trains also come with quarantine seats for emergencies. Train attendants, though, are taking no chances. They're wearing masks and goggles to work. Passengers, meanwhile, will need to present a health code via a cell phone app before they're allowed to enter the train station. They're also reminded to keep their face masks on for the entire duration of the train ride. Flights also resumed at Wuhan's international airport. Same safety measures apply to ensure passengers are healthy before they enter the terminal. And notices abound to remind people to comply to safe distancing. The over 10 weeks of tough restrictions came to an end at the stroke of midnight in a light show watched by thousands. Wuhan and the wider province of Hubei bore the brunt of the outbreak in China, accounting for most of the over 81,000 infections and over 3,300 deaths from the virus. But with rapidly falling cases, restrictions have been gradually eased, with an outbound travel ban now lifted. The Chinese government estimates that as many as 55,000 people will leave Wuhan, a city of 11 million today. The move, though, comes amid warnings by the World Health Organization, which urged governments not to hastily ease restrictions so as to prevent a recurrence of COVID-19 infections. And our China correspondent, Olivia Xiong, speaks to residents in Wuhan to find out how they feel as the city takes cautious steps towards normality.
大家好，我是武汉说唱团的演员李金能，相声演员。这一回呢，我们在军工社区，在这边下沉，在这边支岗。
This was not a job the 41-year-old had ever expected he'd have to do. But after Wuhan became, in his words, the eye of the storm, he stepped forward to become a volunteer.
全副武装，穿戴好的，就是这个样子。
His task, helping to man entry points every other day in the community.
户内户外不聚集，朋友邻里留距离。
And checking permits and health codes of those who pass through.
当然会觉得很辛苦，特别是当他人不配合的时候，一站就是5个小时。我们没有坐下的时候，我们没有喝水的时候，没有敢把口罩拿下来吃东西的时候。就一直还站着，没有坐着的时候，就为什么总是问自己为啥？就是自己给自己挖个坑，然后自己跳进去。但是转念一想，这样的社区其实是我最需要我们关怀的，因为他们不懂事情的严重性，他们不懂病毒的可怕。
With the situation improving, Mr. Li performed his last guard duty on Monday, and in the months ahead, he hopes to translate what he has seen into his craft.
因为他们被受到了限制，他们只能居家，接受这些媒体带来的信息，那些不为人知的一面，他们不知道。那么需要通过我们这样的人，把身边的这些事情挖掘出来。并且搬到舞台上去的。
The lockdown has kept Wuhan residents indoors for the last 2 months, and it's devastated many businesses.
很多的这些商店都关门了嘛，不能营业。当然，那个政府也出台了很多政策，然后包括像我们这样的一些微小企业的话，我们的房东，也对我们的房租有减免，所以还 OK。然后我们现在也正在申请复工。
But Ms. Li says it won't be business as usual, even after restrictions are relaxed. Besides putting in place precautions and getting approval from authorities, people are also likely to remain cautious, especially since the pandemic is still raging away in other parts of the world.
因为可能大家今年不会太聚在一起来聚餐呐，或者 party 啊，然后可能就是需要会外送的比较多，所以要出一些方便运送的这样的一些点心。
As for those living outside Wuhan, being apart from family and watching their hometown struggle to contain the outbreak has been difficult. When Singapore-based Wuhan native Guo Hui-sin saw her city come under lockdown, she jumped at the chance to partner a Singapore NGO to source and donate masks and other supplies to hospitals in her hometown.
At that time, you just feel that if they have a chance that you can do anything, I will grab this chance to help them. And just a little, if it's just a little, maybe a few thousand pieces, is also good enough.
She now continues to stay in touch with her family via WeChat, but knows that it will be some time before she can see them in person.
I'm supposed to go back in April, this month, but now I'm afraid that I have to postpone my flight. And my parents also suggest me to stay here to wait until the situation become better. But only the sad thing is I won't see them for more than a year. So I think I will miss them very much.
The next time she returns, whenever that may be, Ms. Guo says she doesn't hope for much, but just to spend more time with her parents.
Apart from creating chaos, tens of thousands of premature deaths and shutting down large parts of the global economy, the coronavirus pandemic has shed some light on some home truths. One is the evil deceptions of the Chinese communist regime. The way Beijing silenced and intimidated the early medical whistleblowers in Wuhan, the way it denied the virus, ignored the repercussions and deceived the world about a threat that was coming its way was deplorable. And who do you think was right there at Beijing's side, helping with the deception, giving precisely the wrong message to the rest of the world? It was the World Health Organization, the United Nations health body that claims in its mission statement to be all about keeping the world safe. Seriously. The WHO boss, Tedros Adhanom, went to Beijing in late January, supposedly on a fact-finding mission, but for all the world it looked like he was bowing at the feet of Xi Jinping. And rather than warn the world or demand China do more, he only had praise for China.
And the other important element is the political commitment and your personal leadership, which we have been following, and also your team, which will help to stop this virus.
Now, this was a crucial time. This is when people were travelling freely between Wuhan and Italy, Wuhan and Iran, and other parts of the world. This is when the coronavirus was spreading globally. But when the WHO boss got back to headquarters, have a look at what he had to say.
The Chinese government is to be congratulated for the extraordinary measures it has taken to contain the outbreak. Despite the severe social and economic impact those measures are having on the Chinese people, we would have seen many more cases outside China by now, and probably deaths, if it were not for the government's efforts and the progress they have made to protect their own people and the people of the world.
Yeah, all hail to Beijing, hey? Apparently the Chinese communists were doing us all a favour. Adhanom has been off the pace and off course all the way along. Remember, he suggested it was racist to ban travel from China or to call this a Chinese virus. And here he was in late January, after Australia had stopped flights from Wuhan, and while we and a number of other countries were about to ban travel from China, here was the WHO saying it would be wrong to restrict travel.
There is no reason for measures that unnecessarily interfere with international travel and trade.
Remember, as I said, the WHO claims its mission is to keep the world safe. Yet it was praising China, reassuring the world and actively campaigning against travel restrictions. No wonder the US president had this to say today.
WHO, that's the World Health Organization, receives vast amounts of money from the United States, and we pay for a majority, a biggest portion of their money. And they actually criticized and disagreed with my travel ban at the time I did it, and they were wrong. They've been wrong about a lot of things, and they had a lot of information early, and they didn't want to. They seem to be very China-centric.
China-centric, eh? Donald Trump points out that the US, as usual, is the largest donor to the WHO, donating about double what China does. And the president has had enough.
They call it wrong. They missed the call. They could have called it months earlier. They would have known. And they should have known. And they probably did know. So we'll be looking into that very carefully. And we're going to put a hold on money spent to the WHO. We're going to put a very powerful hold on it, and we're going to see. It's a great thing if it works, but when they call every shot wrong, that's no good.
Yeah, it's a little more than a distraction in some ways now, because the US, like every other country, is having to deal with this crisis on its own. It's sovereign states, nation states, that are dealing with this crisis now, not so much with the assistance of multilateral bodies like the UN and its WHO, but in spite of them. Yep, That's a bit of light shed by this virus. People and countries battle crises around the world so often not with the help of the UN, but in spite of mismanagement by the UN.
Everyone, today's Monday the 6th of April. Just an update, many shops, this is a supermarket, is now boarding up. You know, I think certain people believe that the virus was the starter and the civil disorder that's coming, that will be the main course. Stick it to the police. Everyone, we're here in the queue at Aldi. It's a German supermarket, very popular here in the UK. Can you see those people all along the wall, 2 meters apart, and it snakes all the way around to me, where I'm 2 meters apart from someone. Someone said to me a few months ago, Charlie, within a few months you're going to be queuing for up to an hour and a half, 2 hours to get into a supermarket to buy food, and that food will be rationed. There's only 2 things that I would believe would cause that. It would be, I guess, a thermonuclear war, and I guess then a very deadly global pandemic. And we got the second one. Morning everyone from Poets Park in Salford. It's Tuesday the 7th of April. Just want to start off by saying 1 note off can spoil the whole symphony. And if China were a symphony, their 1 missing note would be freedom. And that's a key note in the overall composition. The British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, he's taken a turn for the worse with the coronavirus illness, and he's been moved into the intensive care unit at a central London hospital. Now, when the Prime Minister of a member of the G7, a member of NATO, gets hospitalized, and it looks like he's going to die, I hate to say this, but it's not looking good for the poor chap. Of course, I don't want anyone to die, especially not an expectant father. He has a pregnant fiancée. I recently lost a friend, Alex Hall, who was awaiting the birth of his daughter, and it's an absolute tragedy. But the Prime Minister of a democratic modern nation has been fallen ill, and there's a lot of evidence coming out now, circumstantial evidence, that maybe it wasn't the Wuhan seafood market, maybe it was the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, I don't know anything about bioweapon research, I don't know anything about viral research, I don't even know why scientists would want to tinker with a contagious bat virus that could jump to humans. I'm going to try and take a guess. I'm a semi-literate, semi-intelligent man. Maybe by studying and creating variations of viruses, you could study how they are transmitted, you could study defense mechanisms, you can find out chances, I guess, of how many will jump from different mammalian or other species. Can they jump from reptiles? Can they jump from insects? I know mosquitoes can spread malaria, but it's not that malaria is in the DNA of the mosquito, it's that it's in the blood that it sucks around, I think. So again, I'm ignorant, and there's a lot of people even more ignorant than me spreading theories on the internet about 5G. Man, any man would buckle after 5G, but it's got nothing to do with the virus, and there's plenty mainstream debunking videos and stories online from intelligent virologists and scientists and communication engineers that will tell you that 5G isn't an issue. So what I'm trying to get at with my 18 different tangents on this video, the illness of Boris Johnson is at best an act of biological negligence from one of our ideological adversaries. At worst, it's a very well concocted act of war by the Chinese, who are a nasty, tyrannical mafia state. Again, it's just bad energy. The symphony sounds shit because they're missing the 1 note, which is freedom. Now, yeah, it's gone fully mainstream now. Sky News, BBC, ITV, ABC, CNN, 3-letter acronyms, FBI, CIA, CTV, which is actually the Chinese television. It's also my initials. It's an act of war, and I think I'm going to be one of many people now saying that it might be time to enact regime change, a preemptive strike against the Chinese Communist Party. And nobody likes war. Nobody likes death. Nobody likes young soldiers not coming home to their mums or their wives or their kids. In fact, that's hell. That's the worst thing on earth. But I'll tell you what's even worse. What's even worse than that is allowing 1.4 billion Chinese to be treated like a classic, a cogs in the machine, like stupid numbers on the computer screen. We don't know how many died in Wuhan. Chinese said, 2,000. And they ordered 42,000 urns for the cremated ashes. This story's all over China. There's doctors that leaked stories saying there were an extra 250,000 people that died of pneumonia in January and February, over and above the standard deaths in China. So here's how we go about it. As it stands, NATO, and of course the primary member of NATO is the United States. The United States has more aircraft carriers than the rest of the planet combined. The United States can project power anywhere on Earth, and the Chinese cannot. I think the standard CIA method of destabilizing a regime via small acts of domestic terrorism and supporting opposite parties, that could work, but it has also been shown to not work. We look at the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, what a mess that was. We look at the attempted Green Revolution in Iran and how that failed because the regime has the guns. The regime has no qualms with shooting dead thousands of students. It makes my blood boil just talking about this, and how there's so many people here in the West, like, useful idiots that think that Great Britain or America or, the Western European world is a police state, that we are under tyranny. What a load of shit. Can you imagine me sat here in a park bench in Beijing talking about my own government like this? Can you imagine that? With people walking past, secret police and stuff. No, it's disgusting. Can you imagine my hypothetical wife, having a hypothetical second baby and we can't afford the fine? And the local Chinese Communist commissar gets hold of this and goes, well, that's an unauthorized child. The state god, the state religion says that that's an unauthorized baby. And they literally cut the baby out and kill it. We are literally staring Satan in the face, to use a metaphor, to use some symbolism. We are cutting the deal that we've made with the devil for cheap goods, for slave goods, from people working, 15 hours a day in unhealthy conditions so that I could get a Primark hoodie for £1. Note, this is not a Primark hoodie I'm wearing now. So the time is now. It's almost like we've woken up. We've realized, oh shit, this person we're holding hands with is the devil incarnate. And what do? You don't try and do a peace treaty with the snake mind of the devil. You have to destroy it. You have to kill it. You have to never do a deal with it again. And in the case of the Chinese Communist Party, a decapitation strike using every modern weapon available to man, as well as whatever Space Wars technology, Star Wars technology we have to stop, and they need to be stopped, the Chinese retaliation, which will come in the form of intercontinental ballistic missiles. They need to be stopped, or they need to be neutralized, neutered, have their warheads cut out of their testicles, their ball sacks, before they can fire them. But one thing I know, where there's a will, there's a way. If you stand with God, if you stand righteous and you choose what is right and not what is expedient, and the word expedient, just what is easy, what's quick, what's just, we'll get away with this one. And that is the mafia mentality, that is the Chinese Communist Party mentality, that is the Vladimir Putin modern day KGB incarnation that is running Russia. And it's time for us to actually say, we are the good guys. I know we are the good guys. I know the spirit of the West. I know the spirit of Great Britain and what people have fought and died for in the West. I know the feeling of the liberation of the concentration camps. I know the feeling of the Berlin airlift to bring food and medicine and supplies to people that are behind the Stalinist curtain. We've lived through this. I know, I feel in my blood the emancipation of the slaves from enlightened Americans, Englishmen around the world, realizing that all men are endowed from God with a soul. And in China, you have 1.4 billion people being treated like insects. There's the Chinese Communist Party, the fat, corrupt, the money men. They make fun of capitalism. These are the ultra-capitalist fascists running the show. The Chinese Communist Army is not a proven army. They have not had any major conflicts. It's not like NATO, which has been fighting jihadis for the last 2 decades. It's not a battle-hardened thing. They don't have the expertise of the SAS, the Delta Force, the Navy SEALs, the Predator drone systems. China doesn't have any of this. They have a slave army. And a small army can defeat a slave army. But before I keep on ranting too much, the time is now to decapitate the Chinese Communist Party, because it's going to get worse and worse. You think they're going to roll over and be nice after having infected the world with a really dangerous, perhaps man-made virus? You think they're going to be nice after this? Do you not think they're going to double down and keep lying? The virus is only the beginning. It's the civil unrest and the war with China which is really going to change the world.
Over the span of 2,000 years, we have been given a collection of 66 books written by 40 people in various cultures, time periods, and languages. Today we call this collection the Holy Bible. Upon investigation, we find that these 66 books combine to form a message to humanity from a being outside of space and time by writing history before it happens. The Bible predicted the advent of the New Age movement and the New World Order thousands of years ago. It also tells us of a man who will rule this world empire and what his true intentions will be. All of this has been in the works for thousands of years, and it all hinges on Satan's ability to deceive mankind. The Apostle Paul in the 1st century AD wrote several letters to early churches, which are now called the epistles. The far application of these letters are a clear warning for us today. It is a warning of impending deception that will influence the whole world. Paul warns us of this deception in Ephesians 5, where he states, "Let no one deceive you with empty words." Then in his first letter to the Corinthians, he again tells us, "Do not deceive yourselves. If any one of you thinks he is wise by the standards of this age, he should become a fool so that he may become wise." In a letter to the Romans, he describes those who willingly live in lies when he writes, "Their throats are open graves, their tongues practice deceit, the poison of vipers is on their lips. For such people are not serving our Lord Christ, but their own appetites. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the minds of naive people." In a letter to Timothy, Paul clearly describes the world we see today when he writes, "The Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons." In the second letter to the Thessalonians, Paul describes the New World Order and the Antichrist when he wrote, "Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. Don't you remember that when I was with you, I used to tell you these things, and now you know what is holding him back, so that he may be revealed at the proper time. For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now holds it back will continue to do so till he is taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the splendor of his coming. The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. They are perishing because they refused to love the truth and so be saved. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth, but have delighted in wickedness." The Apostle John, while in prison on the island of Patmos, had a vision of the end times and the deceiving entities that will walk the earth, stating, "And the great dragon was cast out, the ancient serpent who is called Devil and Satan. He who deceives the whole habitable world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. He deceives my own people who dwell on the earth because of the signs he was granted to do in front of the beast, saying to those who dwell on the earth that they should make an image of the beast who had the sword wound and lived." Jesus Christ himself gave his discourse of the end times when he stated clear warnings of the signs of the end. Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nations will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of the birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you ahead of time. Jesus Christ died for the sins of all mankind. That means he died for the New Agers, the Freemasons, those in the Illuminati, the world elite, the Luciferians, the Satanists, and even me and you. God himself, taking on humanity, has given mankind a free gift of salvation and of true spiritual freedom. Now we all have a choice. We can live in darkness, allowing evil to enter our lives and unwillingly support the work of Satan and his fallen angels. Or we can let Jesus into our hearts and be spiritually saved forever. There are no prerequisites, rituals, or tests for accepting this gift of salvation. All one needs to do is ask honestly for Jesus to come into their heart. Remember these truths. God loves you, God cares about you, God wants nothing more than to know you personally and save you. Sin separates people from each other and God. Jesus died for your sins and rose again. You can receive Jesus now and know God's love right at this very moment. I pray for you all and hope the truth will indeed set you free. Thanks for your time. I think, in conclusion, I'd like to appeal to those people that have been researching this for any length of time, specifically long periods of time, maybe even years. To you, I don't think this is going to require a lot of convincing. I think that subconsciously you know that a lot of what was said here is true. I think that you have seen over the years a lot of conclusions about what the New World Order is and what their motives are. And I know that you know that it doesn't really explain all the loose ends and tie them all up. I think that you know, after kicking down so many doors in New World Order research and seeing those that truly expose the New World Order, this theme, that it is in fact theistic Satanism behind those doors. I know that you've seen that. You've seen that they are high-level occultists that really run the show and that are in the shadows. And that even those front men at the very tops are only front men, and that the real movers and shakers are those that hold very dedicated beliefs about the worship of Satan. So we even have this idea that somehow doesn't apply. We have a phrase that we'll say, which is, it doesn't matter what you believe, the fact is that they believe it, which sort of means, yeah, sure, they're all occultists at the top, but it doesn't really matter. They're just sort of deluded. And I think that's a very dangerous position, because if you actually are saying there that it doesn't matter, it's not actually true, there isn't really a Satan and there isn't really a power that they're serving, then we should just, again, think that this scenario has something to do with whatever we make it out to be. It certainly can't be about a cosmic war of good and evil, because we've already decided that can't be true. Yet at the same time, we're pointing out that these people are knowingly worshiping Satan, which is something that the Bible has said has gone on from the very beginning. The kings and queens of all the old systems were always sacrificing their children to various gods and Moloch and these types of things. And they are still doing it today and are gaining power from it. The problem with believing that is it makes too much sense that all of this energy with the New Age preachers and teachers and truth movement icons and gurus are doing mainly two things. One, they're promoting this idea of a new age coming in which you're going to be God and you're going to be evolved and all the obvious stuff that's preparing you for the system of the Antichrist. And the other part of that is they're telling you that Jesus isn't good, you shouldn't pay attention to him, or at least they're trying to misdirect you, tell him he's just this other guy, he's not really who the Bible says he is, or they're trying to discredit the Bible. There's only two things that these guys are doing. They're telling you and preparing you for the new system that you're going to think is your utopia. And then they're telling you to not pay any attention to the man that the Bible said would crush the one that these people at the top are worshiping. Does anybody see a problem with that? That we have been told what to think about the Bible and Jesus Christ by Satanists. The problem here is that what we've been told and what we've been prepared to believe is all what we would choose to believe. It's all very seductive. They're telling you that you can be as God. They're telling you that there is no real accountability for your actions, that anything that you want to do is good and normal and should be praised. These ideas are very difficult to resist. Truth really is irrelevant at that point because we will fight to defend those ideas regardless of if they are true or not. And that's why there's so many conflicting quote-unquote truths in the New Age and in the truth movement. You know, that's why the first thing that you're taught in the truth movement is that truth is relative. Oh, it doesn't matter, your truth is just as good as my truth, and we'll fight to defend this completely erroneous idea. I've got news for you. It doesn't matter what way the universe operates. The fact is that it does operate one particular way, cause and effect, in a closed system. We are dealing with absolute truth. Maybe yours, maybe mine, but it is absolute, and it is one. We should be concerned about looking for the truth. And I suggest to all you researchers out there that you already have enough evidence to know that Jesus Christ is who he says that he is. You owe it to yourself to figure out more about him the way the Bible says that he is. Not the way that the New World Order says that he is, but the way the Bible says that he is. The Bible has been continually discredited. You're told not to listen to it. You're told not to pay attention to it. They do everything under the sun to keep you from it. They always have. So why don't you just realize that and take the time and figure out who is Jesus according to the Bible?